Well, welcome everybody to Alpha Crucis College webinar. We call these Leadership Exchange, where over the course of the year, every month, we've had a different topic where we've brought guests in to exchange ideas around that topic. But more importantly, we want to engage in all participants. So we want to encourage you today to use the chat room as much as possible. There's some familiar faces there. Hey, Gabby. Down there at Edith Berg, how are you? And yeah, just really want to encourage you to exchange any ideas that you might have over the course of the conversation. So also want to let you know that we are recording this session and it's going to be loaded to an Alpha Crucis YouTube channel. So you can either watch it again later, but we also encourage you to share it to anyone that you know that may benefit from tonight, which I'm sure they will. So for all intents and purposes, my name is Matthew Potts and I'm the State Director of Alpha Crucis here in South Australia. And we've been here since the start of 2018 is when we launched classes for the very first time here. And every year since then, the last 2 years, we've seen phenomenal growth. And so we're very excited about the church's buy-in with us, and also great just to be helping build the church as much as possible. And that's where topics like tonight are about. It's about helping you in your leadership, in your church, raise leaders, but also build the body of Christ and the kingdom of God across wherever you may be. We've got people from New South Wales with us tonight, New Zealand, and of course here in South Australia. So welcome everybody, and thanks for making the time to be with us. Tonight we'll be chatting specifically with Stephen Fogarty. He is a professor, but he is also the president of Alpha Crucis Global. We're not just here in Australia, but we have many campuses around the world. And he's done his thesis on motivating volunteers in the church. And I've got his book here, Light a Fire, that we'll also be giving out tonight for anyone that he chooses to give to. So ask your questions and we'll post this out to you. This is all about motivating volunteers. And he has led Alpha Crucis to phenomenal growth over the last few years since he's been the president. And we're very excited about the future. So thanks, Stephen, for being with us tonight. We've also got Pastor David Shepherd with us. He is a pastor here in South Australia, leading a phenomenal church. It's just a fast-growing, flourishing church. But also he is a founder of Ignite Ministries, which is a worship gathering primarily for young adults that's seen thousands upon thousands of people gather over the last few years from many different denominations coming together to worship. And so we've invited him on two fronts as the senior pastor to give a perspective of volunteers and specifically creative teams and his insight into that. But also just his heart for worship as well. So we'll be asking some questions around that. So thanks, David, for being with us. And we've got Daniel Thornton, who is under the name of Dad's there. And Daniel has been involved with music and arts with Alpha Crucis, but also has led worship teams and creative teams for many, many years. And so we're excited to tap into some of that knowledge here tonight. So just a few things, really encourage you to use the chat room here, ask any questions there. We don't want to miss any of that. Stay muted in the meantime, but we also will have time for you guys to engage later on as well. So once again, thanks for being with us, and we're excited about all the knowledge and help that you're going to get in your churches. So I'm going to start with you, David, and I'll ask the same question to three of our guests tonight. Can you share your first experience of volunteering in the church?
Yeah, so first experience of volunteering in a church would have been, I grew up in a uniting church. So my dad he was chair of council at the uniting church. And so he loved the idea of having the kid come up and do the Bible reading pre-sermon. So that the first time I ever volunteered in church, I would have been primary school aged. And I don't know if it was volunteered as much as it was coerced by my father, but he got me to come up and do the Bible reading. I remember trembling with fear. you know, when you're so nervous, you sound like you're crying when you're talking. That was kind of me. So I lit the candle and I got that first go. And then I went over and I read the Bible through chattering teeth, but got there in the end. And I'm so glad Dad, and that was the first time, and he made me do it over and over and over again, just trying to build that confidence in front of people, I think.
That's great. Stephen, what's your first experience volunteering?
I think the first formative experience I can remember is soon after I committed my life to Christ. I grew up in a Catholic church. I was actually an altar boy, which is a volunteer task, but I don't remember much about it. But during university, I committed my life to Christ in a church in Queensland, and it was a pretty wild church. Jesus was coming back by next Sunday, every Sunday. And so there was quite a strong eschatological expectation in the church. And so we would go out on the streets every Friday night and every Saturday night, and we would just be out there trying to get people to come back to this coffee shop we had and talk to them about Jesus. So there was a lot of enthusiasm, as you can imagine, a heightened spirituality, very vibrant prayer, and zealous witnessing. It was probably unsustainable. You just can't live at that level for a long period of time. But it was quite a fabulous introduction to enthusiastic, expectant Christianity.
Very good. And Daniel?
Yeah, hey, it's great to be with you guys. Let me first apologise for probably what's a terrible internet. I'm down here on the south coast of New South Wales. I had to drive into town just to get a signal. So hopefully you'll be able to hear what I say. If it all goes belly up, you'll know why. Here I am in my car. Hopefully you can see me. Yeah, look, I grew up in the charismatic renewal of the 70s, and my dad was an associate pastor of a church that just grew out of all that was happening in that space. And so from a pretty young age, I remember, being involved in the kids ministry. That they really engaged us in not just sitting there, but really being a part of the ministry that was happening. And I guess it was probably when I was a teenager that our young youth group, like the early teens, that I had my first opportunity to play and to sing. I couldn't really sing very well, but I resonate with what Dave said before about just, being so nervous the first time I was up in front of people. But yes, it's amazing how just do that enough times and it started to feel a bit natural.
Yeah, it's great. I think it was important just to establish that we've all been volunteers, and probably many of us are still volunteers in the life of our church. So these experiences that we're sharing and the insights that we're sharing definitely come from a place of experience and knowing what you're going through. So it's one thing, guys, to be a volunteer in the church, but tonight we want to speak about how you lead and build a volunteer team. So maybe, Daniel, have you got any thoughts about the first time you had to lead volunteer teams, and maybe share some of the thoughts around what you learned from that to start with?
Sure. Well, I mean, this is the church, isn't it? It's a volunteer team who are all called and all filled with purpose and passion, and somehow we have the privilege of harnessing that. I think with musicians, I have done that in a number of different contexts. Sometimes that's been in pioneer works. So I was the team for a while. And then we had, little 9-year-old Johnny who thought he could play the drums, and, Aunt Martha who thought she could sing in tune, who really wanted to go. But then I've been in, I see Karen right there, and we served together in Paradise. That was a really well-resourced, a very high level of volunteer. You couldn't just lift up your hand and automatically you were there. So I think the different experiences have given me different perspectives on engaging volunteers. And a lot of that for me has centered around what the senior pastor was looking for, what their values were, what their vision was, and how I could outwork that. And that was actually quite different depending on the scenario.
Yeah, great. I mean, Stephen, you're a senior pastor. and a lot of your research has been with senior pastors and motivating volunteers. Have you got any thoughts to carry on from what Daniel was just saying there in regards to what the senior pastor wanted, but then how the senior pastor helps their team build volunteer teams?
Yeah, well, I look at in any context, whether it's a team or whether you're the ultimate church leader, I think there's at least three considerations that come to mind, Matt, if I'm trying to assemble a team. The first thing is, well, what's the purpose of the team? That's my very first consideration. Why do we want to do this? And in a church setting where, as Daniel said, you really are dealing with a volunteer organisation. Everything's volunteer about a church, nearly everything. So the very first aspect of purpose is the purpose of the church. And while we've all got the one purpose, we've all got the Great Commission, there are permutations on it. So I think there's got to be a purpose that's inspiring enough for me to lock myself into it, something noble enough that captures my heart, and I want to do it. So there's the big purpose of the church. And then within the big purpose of the church, if I'm running a certain team, what's the specific purpose of that team? So if I was running a worship team or a creative arts team or something in a church, could I define my purpose in a sentence or something like that? I'd want to do that. I'd want clarity at that point in time, because what you find with volunteers is there's a lot of toing and froing, and you're going to keep on coming back to purpose. It sort of becomes the basis, the ground upon which you build it. So that'd be my first consideration. What is the purpose of the team? Not the general big one, but the very specific purpose. My second question, I think, would be, what's the best way to structure this team to achieve that purpose? What leadership style is going to work here? What skills, talents do you need to belong to this team? Are there entry requirements to be part of this team? Going back to Daniel's one, we've all had the very enthusiastic people who can't sing in tune. So what are the entry requirements to belong to this team? What's the commitments required to belong to this team? Time, energy, what do I have to do to be a part of it? I think these things need to be clear. And I think, without over-commercialising it, what are the rewards? what are the rewards and recognitions that come from belonging to this team? So I think you've got to think about structure, because people are thinking these things, even though they're not saying it. They're thinking them all the time. And then the third question that I would ask, the third consideration I'd have is, what do I have to do as a leader to inspire intrinsic motivation in these people? What do I have to do to draw out their inner passion, interest, desire to make a difference, all those type of things? So purpose, structure, motivation. I'd be contemplating all of those things in the initial thinking of the team.
Yeah, that's great. Dean's got a question here. How unique can a department purpose be while being aligned with the church's purpose? David Shepherd, did you see that question?
I didn't see it, but I just heard it. Is that in the chat section? Is that where we're...
Yeah.
That is a great question. My answer to that is, I think every individual leader needs to feel like they're owning a vision. Vision, I totally agree with everything Stephen and Daniel just said. Vision is key. Vision is everything. If you can cast a compelling enough vision, then you'll have people of, whether they're high capacity or whether they're lower capacity, but they'll feel like they're charging towards something. I think where churches go wrong and where you end up with division is that you do have lots of people with competing visions. I don't have a problem with a vision statement. Like, for example, our youth team is just carving out their own vision statement as it stands, but that vision statement sits underneath ours, and it effectively is the same thing, just in their language. So they feel like we've got a vision, they're excited, they're charging towards that, but it's a part of the pointy end of the arrow that's pointing towards the broader vision of the church. So if my worship leader, in the context of building worship teams, comes to me, that vision needs to, the way that we're worshiping, whether we want to, if we're talking about a particular worship experience, let's say we're talking about Good Friday or we're talking about Easter Sunday, and we want to imagine what that service could look like, that needs to align with the vision of the church. So for us, that vision is broad, and but at the same time, it's simple that people can catch. So Jesus glorified, lives transformed, hope revealed. So is the purpose of, like, is this going to see Jesus glorified? If that's a tick in the box, great, let's go for it. Is it going to reveal the hope of the gospel? Fantastic. Is it going to result in lives being transformed? Great. If it doesn't fit those things, then let's not do it. Yeah. And if someone comes up with a vision that isn't aligned with that, that's pushing in a different direction, then I would say, no, that's not okay. That needs to come into alignment with the church. But I don't believe in drawing such a thin, straight line saying everyone has to have the exact same language, because I think that's a spirit of control, whereas I believe the gospel is that spirit of freedom and release, and releasing people into gifting and passion and purpose. And that's why I say cast a big, large, compelling vision, and then people's vision it'll match the vision that they have for their future and their ministry, and it will come and align with the broader church.
Yeah. Okay. We've got some people here that have been part of, pioneering church services. We've got Cassie here from my church, and Dave, you've done this up in Verdun. How do you go about building a team when there is no team at all?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So just some context, when we planted Verdun, I would hop on the guitar, I would lead worship from the guitar, then I would jump off the guitar, preach, and then jump back on the guitar. Like, I think many of us in this room have probably been there in some way, shape, or form. So how do we build a team when we've got nothing? I think the first thing I would say again is cast a clear, compelling vision. And don't be afraid to do it collaboratively. I think too many pastors and leaders feel like they need to be a Moses, and they need to stand on the mountain, and they need to get the word from God and come down and say, "Thus saith the Lord." I believe God speaks, and I believe in the priesthood of all believers, and I believe God speaks through a round table of elders and the people. So don't be afraid to invite your team into that vision. We often will throw butcher's paper up on the walls, and I will speak to a particular thing, but then I'll invite people just to pray and to dream and to imagine, and they'll throw stuff up on the walls. And then I'll come with a smaller group of people and put that together and start to put that, bring it to a head and see what God's saying through his people. So I think actually, like, inviting people into the vision, inviting people to feel like they have purpose, inviting people to feel like they have a voice, builds that sense of I'm needed. And people want to be needed. And so I think for me, that was a big thing, just inviting people into that space and allowing them to feel like they are not just serving my vision, but they're owning our vision, and they're owning God's vision for the church. And in doing that, I think that gave us some momentum. Yeah. And momentum builds momentum. And so when people are inspired, when people are feeling like they're a part of something, pretty quickly they start to invite others. And and somehow God has a way of getting word out, and people get excited about that. And like with Ignite, there was just two of us sitting around, like my wife and I, and then another couple who'd been dreaming and praying about this vision of Ignite. And we sat down and one day said, we got to do this. And we invited a few other people who we knew had gifts and talents and said, do you want to join us? And shared the vision. And they said yes. And God kind of starts to rally the rest as momentum happens.
Okay.
So invitation, I would say, is a big thing. And last thing I'd say in terms of building that team is don't be afraid to start small. Sometimes I think we see what we want. And so sometimes it seems too far off for us to actually take the first step. But if we're not afraid just to start small and have two people, start with one, add another, and then add a third when the season's right. Again, I think that you don't want to burn your people out quickly. You want to invite people along that road and people are more important than performance, I think.
Okay. So how do you manage the expectation of yourself as a senior pastor with your team, in the sense of, you know, your vision and then that gap between what you hope it to be and where it is now, when you've kind of staged it? How do you work with your team that you keep maybe setting the expectation with, this is the vision, this is where we want to go, and, you know, short of just giving them a Hillsong DVD and say, we want this in 10 years time, so how do we get there from now?
Yeah.
How do you manage that gap between what you want and then what you're seeing each week?
So I would say we communicate what we want all the time. So it's a constant communication of what we hope to see, and we never allow that to fade from people's minds. I know Don Redden says something I really love. He used to be obviously a DJ with Life FM, and he made the point that vision is like a #1 hit song. When you're, as the disc jockey, when you're sick of hearing it, everyone else is only just beginning to hear it. And he's like, you've just got to play that thing over and over and over and over again. And it's only at that point that people are grasping it. So we will constantly talk about where we're wanting to go and why. So it's not just about, we want to look like this. It's about, why do we do what we do? And it comes back to, because we want to reach the lost. We want to see Jesus glorified. We want to see lives transformed. We want to see hope revealed in our city. And therefore, this is what we're trying to achieve. And then in the midst of that, we put expectations, sort of our non-negotiables, like our closed hand and our open hand. So we know our closed hand things are the things, not everyone's a conservatorium trained musician, but everyone can practice and put the work in. Everyone can get there on time. Everyone can learn the songs that they have for that week. Everyone can, you know what I mean? Everyone can do their study. And so we sort of would say that there's non-negotiables, and we know that if people are buying into those core values and those non-negotiables, and they have a clear vision, then that to me sets the trajectory that people start to walk on. And when they see that someone is, it's like anything, if someone's here and you're here, you want to get to there. And so you'll start to put the work in, and you start to be passionate about the craft, and you start to improve in that. So I think it's about constantly holding the vision and having some really key train tracks, some core values that you're not going to steer away from, but accept the fact that people are human. And sometimes it's not going to look exactly how you want it to look. Like when we first started, it didn't look like I wanted it to look, but we were pointing in the direction that we wanted to go.
Can I just jump in there, Dave? You sound like a wonderful senior pastor to work with. You know, I don't necessarily know that all senior pastors are either perhaps as good at communicating vision as you are, but I think also when it comes to what happens in a worship team, not all senior pastors necessarily have the expertise, or they don't necessarily know what they want. They might just know what they don't want. And I've certainly experienced that along the way, where I've done something and I realized, oh, okay, you don't want that. Okay. You still can't tell me what you want, but I'll sort of fish around it. And so I think there's, on the one side, it's wonderful if senior pastors can communicate that and reiterate that vision and apply that to something that's actually very specific. I mean, the way that you're going to express that worship, there's you know, innumerable ways that might be done, but you know, often a senior pastor will, even though they haven't said it, they want it perhaps a particular way. Perhaps they're looking for Hillsong, perhaps they're looking for something else, you know. But so I think that on our side, as leaders of teams, we actually need to really be able sometimes to dig the gold out of there, to really just keep asking the questions until we feel like we really do have a handle on what is wanted, whether it's in really specific areas like style or dress, or whether it's in, you know, sort of more conceptual areas. But I just know I've had to dig for that, so might be helpful.
What type of questions would you ask, Daniel?
Look, some senior pastors good at giving feedback. I think I would ask for feedback on Sundays, and I think one of the difficult things for musicians and singers is that we can sometimes take that personally, and maybe some senior pastors are really good at giving that feedback, and maybe others are just kind of, yeah, you know, it was okay. All right, so, okay, you know, help me understand, was there anything that was detracting from people entering in to worship today? Was there anyone that you felt was really connecting well or wasn't connecting well? Was the sound, you know, how did you feel about the sound? Was it too loud, too soft? What were the particular instruments that were poking out for you? Look, everyone's going to have a subjective opinion on that, but actually ultimately it's the person who's given you that role who needs to be happy, and a million people will offer you an opinion, but at the end of the day, you're only up there, you're on that platform if it's given to you, like it's not yours.
Yeah, that's so good. And sometimes, like, I was a worship leader before I was a pastor, which I think has definitely helped, particularly in the area of worship, because yeah, I know what I want. But I love that whole idea of you've got to dig, you've got to ask, and you've got to keep scratching at the surface to say, well, what does this look like, and what is our preferred future, and where are we going? And you just can't talk. I don't think you can talk enough, can you? You just can't have enough conversations. Communication is so key when it comes to direction.
Most people I can see here are probably in positions where they're leading the teams. And Steve, you mentioned something before about entry requirements, commitments, and rewards. How would you give information to everyone here on how they design that process, and how do they keep that as part of their building into their teams, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. Let me, along with Daniel, commend Dave. I just think some of the things he said there really capture for me the essence of leadership. And I'd also like to reiterate that you can't over-communicate vision. One of the dangers of being a leader is you get bored with vision. I've heard it so many times. but if you really go out there and scratch people, you find they haven't got it. They haven't grasped it at all. You've got to be a bit creative and a bit clever in the way you communicate vision. If you use the same form of words every time, it's going to be boring. You need stories and symbols and images and all sorts of things, but you've just got to relentlessly communicate vision. So going back to your question, there's two components to that, I think, Matt. The first one really is that we just have to understand what we're getting into. So one of the weaknesses I see in most churches I'm aware of is really bad job descriptions, really poor job descriptions, really poorly defined accountability relationships. A job description always comes with some KPIs, and Dave mentioned some of those. So you need these things. So number one, get the basic structure right. Think about it carefully. Everyone needs to know what the rules of engagement are. That's not enough, but at least I know what I'm buying into. At least there's a rationality to my involvement. And then if you do come and correct me or give feedback, Daniel, that is a little challenging, at least there's some objectivity to it. The feedback's on the basis of criteria that we've agreed upon. Every professional organisation in the world runs like that. Why wouldn't you do that in a church setting if you want to maintain appropriate standards as well as a good morale, good esprit de corps? So do that, but then remember, on top of it, it's not enough with volunteers. If you're going to pay them a wage, that might be enough, but most of the time we can't. So let's start building something on top of it. And as has been expressed here a number of times, you've got to build inspiration on top of that basic transactionality, which is really, really important. There are many aspects to being inspiring leader in a church setting, and vision is absolutely critical. I firmly believe that leadership starts with vision. But remember, behind vision, there's something we might call sense making, and that is giving a rationale for who we are and why we're doing what we are. Really, for a Christian leader, a Christian organisation, It's applying the gospel to our context with maybe some quite specific permutations. So leaders engage in sense making, and when people come into church, they're after meaning, they're after shape, they're after purpose. They probably want re-inspired and picked up, and they want to capture hold of something that gets their heart. So we've got to engage in what I call sense making, create a framework of meaning within which we're doing what we're doing. You talked about when you got no leadership team, and we've all been there. We have indeed. I can remember also having my wife on the keyboards and myself playing the guitar, only stopping to take up the offering and to preach, and then do the altar call, and then play the guitar as people left. So we've all been there in that space. In really early days, with a small team, I think work really hard on relating as well, because leaders create relationships and relationship networks. And so people need to be long, they need to be endorsed, they need to be seen, they need to be valued, they need to be heard, all that type of stuff. So very deliberately create a relational context within which you engage in sense making and vision casting, do those things. And then I think the other component of leadership at any point in the journey is just get involved in some inventing, which means creating the structures or the protocols or whatever it is that you need to get this thing starting to move. Leadership that's too passive, it's waiting for someone else to come up with the answers, is almost non-leadership. If you've got almost nothing, it's up to you to structure for almost nothing to become a little bit more and a little bit more, a little bit more. I had a really funny thing a million years ago, Matt, when you would have been a baby. My wife and I pioneered a church in Western Australia. And we were right in this situation. I reckon we had 4 or 5 people who were sort of musos. One guy was a pretty good rhythm guitarist. Another guy hadn't actually committed his life to Christ yet, but he wasn't bad as well. And we had some other bits and pieces. And we were just going through this whole process of essentially trying to create a group there, a sense of group identity. And so we did a really stupid thing, really. We took them all up to Fremantle in Perth, and we went out to dinner, and then we took them all to see Sister Act, which way back in 1989, 1990. And it was really a very cool thing, because it was a lot of fun, and I thought it was a bit corny, but they all came away with this sense of, because remember Sister Act is enthusiastic, vibrant worship, and they're making a difference in their community, and they're all dressed up like nuns. So we all dressed up like nuns next week. That's not true, but I think it just gave them symbolically a bit of a vision of something I couldn't communicate at all, and it was an off-the-cuff thing, but one of the cleverest things I did at that point in time in terms of group formation. That's your responsibility as a leader. To create the group and the structures and the bits and pieces that can help us get from A to B and create the basis for something more significant down the track. So leaders cast vision, they make sense of what we're doing, they create a relational base that gives people meets a lot of the needs that people have brought into the church at that point in time. And they start to, in a very small sense or in a more significant sense, they start to create some structures that will allow this thing to flourish over time.
That's great. Just a reminder to everyone, we want this hour to be super helpful for you. So if we're talking about things that aren't helping, ask some questions in the chat room, and we'll definitely want to help you with anything that you guys are going through. So any ideas that you've got or any trouble spots that you're thinking through, just chuck it in the chat room and we'll address that. I like the concept that vision inspires and gets people involved, but how do you keep them motivated over the long haul? Dave, you mentioned something about momentum builds momentum, but what happens in a time where it feels a bit monotonous? And so the people that have bought in on the original vision and have bought in behind that, and but then the daily grind of week after week starts to kick in, and then maybe as the team grows, the expectations grow. So maybe once it was practice once a month, now it's every fortnight or every week. How do you keep everybody brought back to the vision, but being motivated to keep that fire struck up within them?
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to some of the stuff Stephen was saying, firstly around relationship. I think relationship is huge in that, to walk with people. I think there's also something in there about don't ever ask someone to do something you're not prepared to do yourself. One of my absolute pet peeves is when the band has to be there or the setup crew has to be there at whatever time and the pastor rocks in, 20 minutes before the service starts and it's all bells and whistles and people are working for 2 hours. I think there's something about getting your hands dirty with people. And then when there's special circumstances where, you have to be somewhere else, but there's an understanding there that my leader, my worship leader, my worship coordinator, my pastor, whatever that is with me on the road. And then I think there's also part of that creativity. Again, Stephen said something around cast the vision in lots of different ways. It's the same vision, but you're casting it in a variety of different mediums. And I feel like it's okay to shake things up, and sometimes shaking things up the best thing. We had something last year. We do church in a school gym, and we had this great practice with this great service plan, and literally 5 minutes before there was a blackout, and the blackout only hit this tiny section, which happened to include us. And so we did church in the dark, we called it. We just phrased it as church in the dark, and we managed to find a self-powered little speaker with one microphone, and we had a phone taped to it with a light shining, and it was hilarious. But that actually motivated the group for about the next sort of 3-4 months. There was this real buzz around we did church in the dark, and it showed me something that it's okay. We get into a monotonous way of doing things and we get into a rhythm, and I think it's really we need to be careful not to allow the pattern to become more important than the purpose. And so if we have our purpose, we have our vision, this is part of that collaborative approach. I think sometimes dream up different ways of achieving the same vision. Say, do you know what, let's have 2 weeks where we go just acoustic. Let's give everyone a break. Let's take everyone on a retreat and get you praying and get you dreaming again. Get people out of that pattern and get people into purpose. Get people praying. Prayer to me is everything. If people are praying, there's going to be passion. If people are not praying, then it becomes about just the pattern, and it becomes about I get burnt out. But when I'm on my knees and I'm seeking after God, good things are going to happen. So get people praying and be creative, and don't be afraid to change things up purely for the sake of changing things up. It's amazing when you walk into a room and it just looks different to what it's ever looked before. People come in like, oh, what's going on? This is exciting. And I think there's something in that.
Stephen, have you got thoughts on how you keep your structures and different things once they're designed, keeping everything motivated within that?
Yeah, well, I think again, Dave makes a really good point there, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. I think if it is possible, try to come up with ways of not overworking people. If you can have teams, use teams. If I've got to be full on every week, 52 weeks a year, that's pretty demanding. But if I can break that up and have period of on and a period of off, I think that's really, really helpful. Just remember that people need some downtime and they can't be doing it all the time. So I would do that. The other things that I would really think about very, very carefully is what's driving them. I know they want to play music, and I know they want to serve Jesus, and I know they want to win the world for Jesus. So that's good. And so there's sort of purpose going on there. But people are driven by wanting a sense of purpose. They're also driven by wanting to show you how good they are. So they want to show you their capacity, their competence. So match them to their task. We've already talked about that, of course. I think people are really hanging out for optimism and enthusiasm. I think most people are. And again, it's just a leader's role. No matter how you're feeling, it's your role to be enthusiastic and optimistic in that context all the time. It's a tough gig sometimes trying to keep there. I had a meeting just a couple of weeks ago in my present role here, where it was about 8 o'clock on some night, and I was exhausted, and I must have been a bit flat because out of that meeting, people were disconcerted. Did I do something wrong? Did something go? I thought, no, nothing was wrong at all. I was just tired. And it just reminded me that it's a leader's job to be optimistic and enthusiastic all the time. People also love to learn. So is it possible to make this involvement a learning experience? What can I do to make it a learning experience? Can we bring in some heavy dude from some other church every now and then who might not say anything we don't already know, but, you know, just the experience of exposure and all that, it's helpful. Are there different ways for us to learn? Are there different things for us to learn? I would try and build that into it. You would have heard about the learning organisation. It's a very common idea in the business world, but really the church is the ultimate learning organisation. So in any particular thing that we're doing where people have got constant involvement, I think we've got to recognise that they want to experience personal growth, they want curiosity satisfied, they want to learn some new skills. So make it a learning experience, make it an experience of encounter with an enthusiastic and optimistic leader, make it an experience that's got a bit of shape and some on and off parts to it, and of course make it an experience of a passionate pursuit of a noble vision, which is what our Lord Jesus Christ gives us.
Got a question here about when you don't have enough people for a rotating roster. Daniel, I'm sure you've experienced that many, many times. Even with large teams that you've run, I'm sure there's been times when maybe there's been a select few that, you know, have been the wanted ones on the roster but unable to attend.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I don't think it matters the size of the church. There are always needs. You can have a really large church and suddenly find yourself with 10 drummers and no bass player, or, you know, there's definitely need wherever you are. But I've done the season where I was it. If I wasn't leading, if I was as sick as a dog and I was still leading, because even if I could only croak out a song, it was that or no song. And, you know, sometimes I actually look back and think, gee, was that wisdom? Maybe we just actually could have done without it. And I do think that, especially when we're leaning on worship teams heavily, with musicians, singers, sound people, creative people, sometimes it is very easy for them to start to feel like, even if nothing is ever said to this end, but they can feel like they're only valued because of their gift. That you know, they're wanted because they play or sing or you know, do lights or whatever. And I think one of the really important things we can do to keep motivation strong is to make sure that people really know that they're valued, whether they ever sing or play another note. They're valued because they're children of God, because they're our brothers and sisters in Christ. They're valued because God values them. And I think that we've got to go out of our way to make sure that our teams don't find their way into this avenue where they feel that they're only valued because of what they can do. Look, I also think sometimes pressing through is a really good thing. Sometimes you don't know your capacity until it's really pushed and you realize, you know, actually I can do. Yeah, I've heard when we've gone like from a single service on a Sunday to multiple services, and the team's going, how are we going to be able to do this? We don't even have enough people. But I think when there's that compelling vision, when there's that optimism, all the things that have already been spoken about, I think those opportunities to stretch can be really wonderful opportunities for people to realize that they actually have a bigger capacity than they thought they had. I think equally, we do have to watch people. Individuals respond to some of that stretching differently. Some respond really well and some don't. But I would say, I think Dave mentioned it before, I don't always think we need to run at the very top. You know, if we've got 2 guitarists and we've got 2 keyboard players and a bass player and drums, and they're on all the time because we want all of that level, I think we set ourselves up to eventually hit the wall unless we're growing, because just as wonderful as worship is, the output of it, the ability to bring people and connect people with the presence of God, and the love of music, all of that, they're wonderful things. But anytime you just do that over and over and over again, it is very easy for a mundane thing to settle in. And I think I've got to constantly challenge myself, and I'm constantly challenging our team to see this day as a new day. This is the day that the Lord's made. This is the day that he's worthy of praise. It's not a repeat of last Sunday, even if we did exactly the same songs. So keeping it fresh, and that doesn't necessarily mean, constantly pushing those limits where probably someone's going to hit the wall.
And we want people to be worshippers, don't we? And we want people to worship not just on a Sunday, but in their homes. And if we can show people that actually worship, like a worship moment can be anywhere at any time with anything. Like one of the greatest of two of my just most amazing experiences. One was with Dr. Daniel Thornton, just leading from the piano, just going free worship. And it was just so glorious. And you got captivated by it. Another one was in Melbourne with 30 people in a room and one guy on acoustic guitar, and you could hear the harmony of people singing, and it was just extraordinary. Every time I tried to open my mouth, I just started weeping. I was like, this is and it wasn't like, if we just talked purely practically, the guy on the guitar wasn't that fabulous a guitarist. He had a good voice. But, there was nothing special about it, but it was special because the Holy Spirit was in it. And it was a room full of worshippers who learned that it doesn't matter about how amazing the team is. What matters is my heart before a holy God. And that we actually, I think, have a job to train people in that too. Would you say, guys, as leaders, we've got to train people to worship in all situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Great thought. Look, I do know that I've worked for some senior pastors who want the very best on all the time. They want it there because they know that it can be there. And I think sometimes it is worth having the honest conversations, as honest as you can have them, to go, look, what we want to set this up so that we're growing, and so that we can do this till Jesus comes back. And to do that, you can't always be, constantly pushing the edges of everyone's abilities or capacities. I think so I know there's senior pastors who only ever wanted me to lead, and I think that's problematic, and that needs an honest conversation.
That's great. In regards to over a team, so we've spoken a little bit about pioneering teams and getting vision that way. What happens? How do you manage taking on a new team and maybe having to re-pioneer it? Any thoughts on that?
So Matt, was that taking on a team or an organisation?
Yeah. So if you're a worship pastor, or you've taken on, you've just become a newly appointed leader of the team from somebody else, what are some aspects that you would put in to motivate them with starting fresh, maybe under you?
I'll talk for a minute. I want a bit more theoretical, I think, and we hear the real experts. But to me, the things you're dealing with are still the same, Matt. The things we've talked about still apply. But walking into a new situation, we use another word a lot, and it's a pretty important word. It's called culture. And I'd be really, really quickly trying to shape the culture for that organisation. And within this concept of culture, we sometimes talk about another word, which is climate. The climate within it, and that's more the emotions and people's critique of the culture. And they're really, really important things. On a big scale, I've been involved in merging with a couple of other organisations. And we all look the same, and we all talk the same, and we all love Jesus. And there are some really, really subtle differences going on underneath there, and you've got to deal with them. Because you're the leader in that context, then you're the shaper of culture. And I'd be very, very focused on getting them on board in regard to that. And the reality, Matt, is that you'll probably lose some. in that process. There are some people who are probably not going to buy in to whatever it is that you're bringing into their organisation or into their team. So as gently as you can, as compassionately as you can, try and read the culture and try and decide whether it's appropriate, whether it's what you want, and work hard at shifting culture very, very early. Because if you don't, it will be really hard for you to lead down the track.
Stu Cameron said something that I found very, very helpful. He said, don't be afraid to move at a glacial pace. And he talked about the fact that we all love rivers when rivers are flowing really hard. But often if you look behind a river after a storm, there's a fairly big mess. But a glacier has a way of cutting through rock without leaving too much mess behind. And I found that to be a very profound statement. It's a very Baptist statement. But I think sometimes having a lot of coffees, sitting with people, hearing their heart, sharing your heart. Yes, it takes time. Yes, you're not going to get to where you want to go straight away, but you will get 3 years down the track and you'll look back and you'll think, wow, we've come a long way. And that person over there who was very anti this direction when we first started, over the course of 3 years, some will leave, as Stephen said, they will, but you'll bring a lot more with you if you move just a little bit slower and you're prepared to have the conversations. Don't just pander to people, like have the deep conversation, have the real conversation, explain the vision like we talked about over and over, explain the why do we want to go this way, and make it compelling. Talk about the gospel as much as you can. And if someone doesn't want to come with you for the sake of the gospel, then they're not worth having with you. But more often than not, I think you'll win people with a little bit of time.
Great. We've got a question from the group here from Elias. And he says, how do we get church members to contribute their gifts to keep the church moving if it's not specifically in the creative team? So I'm assuming, Elias, that maybe that question is if someone wants to be involved in helping the creative team and being involved with it, even if they don't necessarily have the skill set, or as Stephen mentioned before, maybe a certain entry requirements into certain levels of the team. How do you handle those conversations? Daniel?
I was going to say maybe one of the senior pastors should talk. Oh, look, you know, there are definitely people who want to be a part of creative teams and simply don't have what you need them to have. And sometimes you can say, you know, you can talk about if they really feel that's something God's called them to, then they, you know, you can encourage them to go and do the work that they need to do to bring something back to God that they'd be pleased to offer Him. You know, David said, I will not offer God that which costs me nothing. And I do think there is this, there's a beauty in the sacrifice that we can give as musicians, as singers, as technical people, to learn our craft and to do that well, and without ever losing the heart that actually sits underneath that. There are lots of roles that are not on the platform, and I do think we have this interesting, if we put people on the platform, we tend to feel like that we're endorsing them entirely. We're endorsing their life. So, you know, often if someone is on the platform, that the standards in a lot of churches that I've been in might be higher in terms of what they're doing off the platform. But there's so many opportunities to serve in the body. I guess I would, you know, if someone's desire is only to be on the platform, that's a bit of a concern to me. I often had people who in our teams, and I would ask the singers or the worship leaders to also be on, you know, words or on sound, not because they had any interest in it, but just because it was a test of that, you know, am I only interested in serving Jesus when I'm on when I'm the starry, I'm the starlight. Yeah. So that's a couple of thoughts. I'm not sure that answers the question, but anyway, there's a couple of thoughts.
No, I think that's great. We've got 5 minutes to go, guys. So we've got a couple more questions. So if you've got questions from the group, send them through. Might finish with what is the ideal volunteer? So if you could explain to your leader, this is the type of volunteer, what are the characteristics that you think they should have? Maybe start with you, Dave.
That's where I would go for a few C's. I would talk about character. No one's perfect, but I want a character that's on its knees in prayer, someone who's seeking to grow in God, and that's first. Then I would talk about call. So someone who's actually called to that particular area. And there's volunteers, as Daniel was just talking about, where we need to serve not because I feel particularly called to that area, but because I feel called to the vision of the church. And there's a need. And so even though I want to sing on the platform, actually what I need to do today is wipe down the floor at the end of lunch, that sort of stuff. And that reveals character as well. So are they actually called to the vision of the church? Are they going where we're going? Do they have the godly character? And then you start talking about, your competency. Are they gifted? Like you got to try and say it in a nice way, but not everyone's joyful noise unto the Lord that's not always joyful to everybody else. Like, it's joyful to God, but if it's going to be a distraction to people who are also trying to make a joyful noise unto the Lord, then you probably don't want them making that noise over the microphone. And how do I articulate that, Daniel and Stephen, is a very interesting conversation. But yeah, do they have the competency? Do they and the capacity is the last one. Like, do they actually have the time to give? I've come across some fantastic people who are called, they have the competency, they've got great character, but they are just so busy and they're constantly bailing. And you just can't have people who are going to be bailing all the time. And so I want someone who's another C word, is consistent, who is reliable, someone who I can trust, and I know they're going to be there. They've got a heart for the church and they love Jesus with all their heart and soul. I'll take that person every day of the week and invest in them and train them up and grow them in the areas that they're passionate about.
That's great. I reckon we could have another hour conversation on those things, mate, but we won't. Stephen?
Again, I agree with Dave wholeheartedly. I think if you're a leader, be a leader. A square peg in a round hole is going to create a shaky organisation. So you've just got to be frank and compassionate with people and try to help them understand what they're capable of and get them into those roles. Let me flick it around just for a moment, because you're doing that, but at the same time, you're trying to bring them along with you. And so I think here's what I'm trying to get in people's heads, what I want them to be thinking. I want them to think that my leaders trust me. I want that to be something in their head. My leaders trust me. I want them to be thinking, I'm making a difference in people's lives by my involvement here. This is the type of software I want going on inside them, and that might help to deal with some of these trickier areas. Might help to help them to moderate some drives that they're feeling, and probably also I want them to say, I'm experiencing spiritual growth. I'm experiencing the joy of the Lord, if you like, through my involvement in these things. And so somehow I want to get those messages across. So I want to get that software in there, and that's going to help me, I think, get them to fit in where they fit in more effectively. As a leader, it's my job, really, in the end, to make the decision about where they fit within the organisation. Hopefully consultatively, but I think it's a lot easier if I'm contemplating what's driving them and trying to get that type of software in their head. And probably many other things I could say there as well. That's great.
I know we're in the last few moments here, so perhaps just speaking, I don't know all of you who are on. I just want to encourage you to keep pressing away. There there in life, there are seasons, and sometimes they're filled with that sense of momentum and that sense of purpose, and sometimes they can be pretty dry. But the thing that I've discovered over a lot of years is that there's something just about continuing to be faithful, to continuing to just keep sowing, whether it's a fantastic season or a really challenging one, because God is faithful, and a man reaps what he sows. Be diligent. Diligence is a man's precious possession. Proverbs says a person's precious possession. So be diligent in what you're doing. I know that God will bless it, and it doesn't matter whether people see it or they don't see it. If God sees it, it's enough.
Very good. Well, thank you, Stephen, Dave, and Daniel for being part of this chat. But also for everyone else that's a participant here, thank you for all that you do in your church, because what you are doing is making a difference, not just for those that you're leading, but also for those that you're serving. But then there's also those that aren't in the kingdom yet, that will be because of what you're doing every single week. The prayers that you're praying for your team is making a difference out in the world. And so I just want to thank you for your time midweek, giving up your time for an hour, maybe giving up MasterChef, I'm not sure, but we're really, really thankful for you joining in on this conversation. And we just want to reiterate as well that Alpha Crucis, we're here to partner with the church. These conversations are what we're having every month to help you do what you're doing, because our job is to equip and raise Christian leaders to reach and change the world. And if we can play a small part in helping you do that, then we're doing our job. And so there'll be more of these conversations coming up that are purely around how you do what you do and how you serve your church and fulfill God's call on your life. And so once again, thanks again for your time tonight. And we will send out a link with the conversation tonight. So feel free to send that around to any other church leaders that you know that you think might benefit from hearing part of this chat. And if you want to know more as well, just flick us an email. We can put you in touch with the different guys that were part of the conversation. So before we go, just let me pray for you, and we'll go from there. Lord, we thank you for every life that's here, that's listening to this conversation. God, we pray that your Spirit speaks so clearly to them about what they're called for and how we worship you and bring you glory, and how we lead those that you've put in our care. Because God, we want to be great shepherds. We want to be great custodians of your people. They're not our people, they're your people. And we want to have a heart for raising them to be all that they're called to be in their service of you. And so once again, Lord, we thank you for all that you've done in our lives. And we pray that you continue to equip and give innovative ideas to every leader here on this call, Lord God, that they can keep making a difference for you. In your awesome name we pray. Amen. Well, everybody, thanks again. Have a wonderful week, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.